Good morning, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. And as usual, I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you want to contact me for anything at all, feel free to do so. Today, I'm going to be talking about a concept that I've been pondering in my mind for quite some time now, and that's the concept of love. However you want to define that word, it's something that a lot of people try to define in a very concrete way or in a way that's understandable in a, overarching, all-encompassing kind of definition. And I think this is the problem that occurs in a lot of just a lot of discussions about this particular topic, is that people seem to have a lot of views as to what real love is, and that there's this quote unquote fake love, if you want to call it that, or what is real love, etc. And it's made me realize that it's not a question of fake love necessarily, but there is a notion of there's a quality about love in the context of it, symbolizing two very different things, which is just the problem of language in general, is that it's very, it's just very not conducive to understanding things very well. It's very limited in its own regard. So when we come into the concept of love, we realize that there's the basic chemical of love, like oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine kind of all meshed in together in this whirlpool of emotions that people will feel, especially if you've ever been in love with someone in a romantic sense. There is a genuine feeling of love that is beyond just infatuation. Infatuation is mostly lust, if anything. Lust in a more developed sense, I would say. Lust can just be very base level, just genuine physical attraction to someone, whereas infatuation is more geared towards this aspect of not only do you have this inner drive towards being attracted to someone, but you also have, there's a click between you and another person that gets you infatuated. And then you have this love aspect where you have the emotional, the lingering emotional quality from infatuation that extends longer than, whatever infatuation, however long that lasts. Usually infatuation, lasts for maybe a few weeks or so. And if you get into the deep emotional bonds of love, that can extend itself to several years. And this is actually the problem that is plaguing, the current zeitgeist of society, which is that people are often falling in love with each other, getting into these relationships that last, 2, 3, 4 years at the most, and then they break up, and it's a horrible feeling because they were in love, and there's this emotional bond that's broken because the love that they had didn't last extensively beyond what was the emotional or physical bonds of love. And the problem is that we live in a very secular society, and this isn't a message about religion, although there is a religious aspect to it, because a lot of this fake, fleeting love that is perpetuating even amongst, long-term relationships, more than 2 or 3 years, even though they still fail in some regard, is usually the result of the lack of a spiritual regimen. Right? So a lot of people like to reject religion in favor of, constructing their own spiritual beliefs based off of their own opinions, and thinking that for some reason that they're smart enough to put things together in their own way, which has become more of a problem than an actual solution. And it's, it hasn't really hit the toll in terms of affecting things severely, but it's starting to push itself into that direction. And one of the main things is this love aspect, where I've seen this a lot, especially amongst, spiritual people, where they get into this concept of love in a very emotional sense and in a very emotional experience. And it's not to take away that experience isn't real, but when you are gravitating towards that feeling as the all-encompassing absolution of what love is defined as, you find that you'll end up being drained in a lot of ways, and also you'll find that love will ultimately be fleeting in the end, because that feeling cannot just last indefinitely. And this is where the true test of what I would perceive as true love is when that feeling that you experience for a very, an extended amount of time, a few years, let's say, and then all of a sudden it goes away because everything ultimately dies in the end. Love is one of those things that also dies, and this is the main principle as to why this kind of love, this all-encompassing emotional experience of euphoria within love, will never last, because if it dies, then the love dies, and then you end up breaking up with your partner for that reason, because the love that you felt went away. And because it went away, you just assume that, well, it's time to move on, and love died, and now it's time to have a new chapter in your life without this person. And this is where the concept of a religious bond comes into play, because if you're truly with someone in a loving way, there's no tendency to rely off of the emotional bond, because that's what the true love actually is when you're actually in a bond with someone, and once those emotions turn negative, turn sour, turn dead, and you feel like there's emptiness, you still have a relationship with that person, because they're just part of your life. They're just your life. And even though you lack those feelings anymore, you still hold on to that person because it's just your lifestyle at this point. And eventually those feelings do return in another way, but it's ultimately the true test of love, whether you are able to not just hold on to that emotional euphoric feeling through experiences and recapturing essence, but rather being able to go through the mundanity or the languish of a romantic partnership and be able to still appreciate and enjoy the other person's company. And this is strictly a spiritual phenomenon. And I think the spiritual phenomenon is something that people do not seem to grasp in a legitimate way, because most people are grasping onto the emotional, euphoric context of spirituality, which is what a lot of these spiritual people sort of gravitate towards, which is kind of this psychological trickery to sort of program your mind in a spiritual way to sort of experience joy and euphoria at all moments of all time. And at some points, these people end up getting into relationships with others where they experience this euphoria with them for an extended amount of time, and then just like any other transitory experience, it dies, and that emotional bonding is no longer present, so to say. And the way to experience that again is to make sure that the spiritual aspect is truly in line, and the spiritual aspect has nothing to do with experiencing some kind of emotional experience. It has more to do with a commitment within your spirit towards this other person, that you are both on a mission together in some context towards cultivating yourself in the proper context and building a family and keeping the family together, and not getting caught up in the emotional responses towards the relationship, which a lot of people value more than the more valuable aspects of a spiritual bond with someone, which has nothing to do with feeling euphoric or joy. It has more to do with building something that eternally lasts, both in the physical world and in the spiritual one, which ultimately comes through family. And this is one of the main reasons why you see divorce becoming so prevalent, is because mostly people are obsessed with the notion of finding the need to experience this euphoric joy with their partner at all moments of all time, because they're addicted to what I call the spiritual candy, which a lot of influencers and YouTubers encapsulate on to, sort of entice people into a spiritual realm, because there are benefits in an emotional sense, but those emotional benefits that come through spirituality are ultimately just fleeting experiences, right? They're not the end goal of a spiritual practice, because ultimately when you're truly in the spirit, you're not in an emotional state. You're not experiencing euphoria or joy or even depression or happiness. You're content. And contentment isn't an emotional state. It's a state of, I would say, solidity within oneself. And when you have that with another person, you're not creating a bond of an emotional attachment. You're creating a spiritual attachment in a way that's content, in a way that's not really based around having to rely off another person for your own emotional security, but rather you are sort of existing contently with one another. And, you do experience those emotions, but when those emotions die, ultimately, you are still in the content state. That's your baseline with this other person. You just can't really live without them in a real way. And even if they die, you can still retain that contentment with them. God forbid they die, but that's part of life. Everyone ultimately goes in the end. And it's always going to be heartbreaking in a sense, because you're losing a part of yourself, but ultimately that is the true love, in which you can sort of embrace the other person with their faults and their benefits. Faults or not benefits, their I'm losing the word for some reason. Anyway, the good things about the other person, and you can sort of accept them holistically without having to rely off only the good aspects of the other person, which is a huge problem with dating and relationships, is the expectation that another person has to be quote unquote perfect or give something back to you. A lot of people have this very selfish incentive in relationships where the other person has to give them something in return. When in reality, it's, you both know what you want, and you're both trying to create something in that context. But ultimately, we live in a very selfish world, even in the spiritual, empathetic sense, where people feel like they need to have everything about them respected in a very perfect, therapeutically boundary-driven way. And you find a lot of these people with all their boundaries and their psychosomatics of trying to create a perfect and ideal relationship end up having everything crumble around them, because ultimately living with another person involves having to deal with their faults and their setbacks and their inadequacies as a person. But ultimately you're with them because you know what you're trying to build with that person, and you're trying to sustain life in a meaningful way. And that's ultimately what real love is. It's life, in a sense. It's life with another person, just like you have life with your family and your friends, that you don't have these strong, you have strong emotional bonds with your family, but let's just say you have a good friend of yours that you've known for a while, and even though that emotional bond is still there, you can still enjoy their company in a very mundane sort of context. You can kind of just, go grocery shopping with them in a very mundane fashion, and it's still a content existence. You're not chasing after this fleeting emotional experience of romance, so to speak, because romance ultimately is, a polar opposite of, let's say, hate. And this is where there's the dichotomy of the love and hate version of love versus the true love, which is all encompassing within the regards of life, and you're still holding on to that. When you're in the realm of love and hate, that's when you get into the toxic relationship dynamic, right? Where you have two people that go into cycles of loving and hating each other and feeling like they hate you and I never want to see you again, and then I can't live without you, all that kind of nonsense. And that's where you see the false love sort of play out the most, and it's what a lot of people have been ascribing towards in recent years, is this fake dichotomy of love, even though love is being promoted, and this is outside the context of a romantic partnership, and let's just say like in the context of a communal sense of loving and compassion and feeling togetherness and all this other crap, where you see in a lot of these spiritual communes of people having these loving, embracing, and euphoric joy amongst all their people and then their tribe, whatever they call it. But then you find these same people, as soon as something challenges their perfect boundary-driven world of which they love, then it turns into hate all of a sudden. They become very they express a lot of animosity towards whatever's challenging their perceived perfect box of a world of which they love. And it's not the true all-encompassing love that is, encompasses the entirety of all things. It's the love versus hate kind of thing. And we see a lot of people, especially self-proclaimed empaths, talking about love in this way, where there is that dichotomy of love and hate, where they're so loving and compassionate and kind and joyous, but as soon as one little thing sets them off or pisses them off or takes them out of their joyous and positive vibe, all of a sudden they turn into like this venomous creature that just wants to kill everything. And I've seen this so many times amongst people who put on this mask of joy and optimism and positivity, and then one thing goes wrong in their life, and then all of a sudden they're a terrible person to be around. And this is a dynamic that goes into relationships, and you find why a lot of people can't get into actual relationships is because they cannot live in a truly loving sense. They live only in the love versus hate context. So they'll see a person only in a divided black versus white kind of way, where they see a person only as they are and what they love about them. And then when they find something that they dislike about them, then all of a sudden it turns into that hateful spite, and they see the true self of what that person is. And this isn't talking about, abusive partners or people who are just genuinely like bad people towards you. I'm just talking about normal people in day-to-day life. And I see this perpetually where, people say they want long-term relationships, but they ultimately can't hold on to it because they don't want to experience any kind of unpleasantness in their life. They just expect that a truly loving partnership is just going to be pleasant and loving throughout all their lives. And that's objectively not true in any partnership that's actually lasted. The ones that last are the ones that, stick it through, whether bad or good. And that's the true encompassing of love, is that you're able to accept what is good and what is bad about another individual, so long as they're not, destructive towards you as a person. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are choosing to reject relationships because they don't like the discomfort of feeling that depressiveness or that feeling of the lack of the emotional aspect, because people are junkies. They're dopamine junkies, they're oxytocin junkies. They all want these experiences of emotional justification, but they don't get it because that's not how life works. You can't just expect to experience an emotional response with someone 24 hours a day. It's going to die. It will die. Every relationship dies, but the ones that last are the ones that, even though it dies, they stick through it and remain content because they know that they're building something greater than just an emotional experience. Because this isn't a Hollywood movie where everything's just joyful and happy and blah, blah, blah. This is something that you're building towards, that's something real and genuine with another person. And there will be moments where the love dies, in a sense, or you just get sick of that person in a way. And a lot of people just give up because they're weak. A lot of people are so weak when it comes to love and being committed to someone, because they just don't want to experience any kind of discomfort, right? Everything has to be comfortable and positive and happy. And yeah, they're junkies. That's what a lot of people are, and they don't even realize it. They just expect this to happen, and they wonder why relationships never work. And it's for that specific reason, is that they have this need of desire, that they expect something from a partner, that they expect them to be this way at all moments of all time. And this is where something that is that it comes beyond just being able to talk about it and communicate effectively. It has more to do with being in touch with a spiritual essence of unity that you both are going towards, which is ultimately God. There's no way to deny it. That's why monogamous relationships have only worked in the context of religion and spirituality, because in any other context, if you're just going purely by animalistic drive or just base instinct, you'll never be able to create love. It just won't work. No matter how many psychotherapy bullshit whatever you construct for yourself, there'll always be that dynamic of dissatisfaction and discontent and feeling like you're not truly yourself, because you're not in line spiritually at all. You're in line with your emotional output and your emotional experience as being the dominant aspect of importance. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I just thought I'd brush up on it because it's been on my mind. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Peace.